I'm Brandon Isle with BYU-Idaho Radio, and joining me in the studio is State Senator Doug Ricks. He's in District 34. He is the chair of the Local Government and Taxation Committee, and he's in the Judiciary and Rules Committee. Doug, thanks for joining me today.
Well, you bet. Thanks, Brandon, for having me.
Yeah, it's been, a week and a half, 2 weeks since we stopped the legislation, or the session has ended, and we're kind of moving on, getting past, but wanted to talk about the session and how it went.
Yeah, so you see this big smile on my face. We're back home. It's nice to be done, for sure.
Yeah. So looking over, 81 days of the legislature this year, what are some things that stand out to you? What were the important things on your list?
Well, this year, it started off with a lot to do with taxes because, last year we made some significant cuts to taxes. Around $450 million in taxes, and we set a budget, that conformed to that number-wise. And then during this past summer, the feds passed the One Big Beautiful Bill, and typically Idaho conforms to whatever the federal government does on tax policy for filing taxes and things. And this year, some of the things that they did had an impact on Idaho's budget. And so we ended up conforming to that, complying 100% for individual taxes and things, the benefits that were there. But there was a cost to Idaho's budget on that, about $155 million, we estimate. And not only that, the feds did this in the middle of the summer last year, but they backdated it to the first of the year. So, January 1st, 2025 is when all this took effect. And so we had to decide, do we backdate and, suck up and try to recapture $155 million. Ultimately, that's what we did. But because the tax breaks in the One Big Beautiful Bill for individuals only are set, they actually expire in 4 years unless they're extended. So we didn't want to shortchange Idahoans. We wanted to make sure that they get those benefits.
Yeah, and that was the hard thing about this session is that's a lot of money, and Idaho was already projected to have shortfalls, and there have been budget holdbacks that the governor enacted initially before the session and proposed more holdbacks, and that's a lot to deal with, especially on your plate as the chair of your committee. How do you kind of go about figuring out what to do and what's best for Idahoans?
Yeah, so it was an interesting process. So we came in with a shortfall. The governor had ordered, a 3% holdback just in anticipation of being short. So our state budget year goes. It's not on a calendar. It's a fiscal year. So it starts July 1st and then goes to the end of June 30th. So we're still in the what we call the fiscal year FY26 period until the end of June this year. So the cuts we ended up having to do some rescission, meaning take some money away from some of the state agencies and departments, about 3%. The governor asked for that, but we spent a lot of time kind of trying to figure out the compliance part with the One Big Beautiful Bill and our current situation with the state budget. We have figured out after the fact here that a lot of our corporations started after the feds passed that One Big Beautiful Bill. Some of them started holding back some of the tax money in anticipation that we would comply 100% with it. And that was really where some of the shortfall came from, is reduction in corporate income tax returns. And we didn't comply 100% with all of it on the corporate side for research and development. At least you can't, but eventually they'll be able to take all those. So some of it's deferred. So corporations will get all those tax breaks in Idaho, but not in 2022. The feds kind of put it as depreciation over 5 years instead of taking 100% all at once, and that kind of led us into some of that mess right now. And then the feds decided to take it all, make it all back up in 1 year, and that was too much of a bite for Idaho. And so by the end of about 2028 or 2030, then all that back research and development credits will be filtered through and taken by corporations at that time. So that was a lot of it. It took us a couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, to figure that part out and understand the full impacts tax-wise early on in the session, and that's kind of what got us into a little bit of a slow start.
Yeah. This session wasn't really any longer or much shorter than past sessions, but how would you characterize just this session in general?
So, each session kind of has its personality of its own, depending on the issues that come up, the environment, economy-wise. But a lot of it really had to do with trying to comply with this, trying to figure that out. So that really slowed things up for quite some time. Our tax compliance bill, which is House Bill 559, I was one of the main sponsors in the Senate side of that, but I worked with our colleagues on the House side, and we come up with those conditions in there. But that was the first bill that actually passed all the way through, and the very first one the governor signed. Normally it's done within the first couple of days, but it was almost 2.5, 3 weeks before we passed that one. So that everybody was kind of trying to figure out, okay, do we have money? Because if you don't have a lot of money, then it's hard to figure out some of the other bills and spending and things. So everything was contingent on this, and it just took a long time to figure out some of the research and development credits. Idaho already gives some, and we didn't want to allow some kind of double taking of some of those credits, and it just took a long time to work through some of this and figure that out.
Yeah. And once those started coming through, then it got a little easier, right?
Well, it did, and then the floodgates kind of opened up, and we ended up, even though I had a slow start, we had, on par-wise with last year, the number of bills and things that we did. There was a significant number of bills introduced, prepared, over 1,000 bills. We ended up passing about 350 bills when it's all said and done. But it does bog down our system when there's so many bills that are introduced.
Yeah. Do you think some of those bills just shouldn't be introduced, or I don't know what would be a good compromise to keep the legislature in session for a shorter amount of time and just get you in and out?
Oh, boy, that's a big, long discussion. The Senate actually passed a resolution to kind of limit how many bills a person could introduce. I think it was 10 or something like that. The House didn't even pick that up and consider it. But there are some legislators who have introduced in excess of 50 bills. And you get so many ideas. If you actually were to limit how many you could introduce, it might allow somebody to take more time to prepare it, because you can introduce a bill into a committee. If they reject it, you can come back and tweak it a little bit, make some adjustments, introduce another bill. You can keep doing that really kind of ongoing-wise. And it's kind of like throwing a lot of spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks. But I don't know. That is a discussion that comes up every year, is how do we limit the number of bills? Is there a way? And constitutionally, is that a good thing? We want to make sure that everybody has a voice and has the ability to bring legislation, but I don't know.
No solution yet.
No solution yet.
Well, I know there were obviously bills that had nothing to do with the budget, had nothing to do with taxes. One that stands out that there's a lot of angst for and against was the bathroom bill, I think it's affectionately known as. That one, how did you feel about that one when you heard about it, and how did you vote for that?
Yeah, so the bathroom bill, it's one of those that was designed to really I mean, it's one of those things that I don't think there's a real problem here in most of East Idaho and places like that. But it was designed around the fact that they wanted to keep men from going into women's bathrooms or locker rooms. Right now, with some of the situation nationwide, some people feel like they can just believe that their gender has changed. For example, a man could say, "Well, I'm a woman today," and go into the girls' locker room at school or college or things like that. And in some cases, there's nothing you can do about that because the person's claiming that they're a certain type of gender. It does have, I think, a negative impact for those who have transgendered sexes. It does make it a little tricky for that, but there are some significant penalties and things for people who go in to the wrong bathroom. But really, it was designed, the bill itself, it's kind of given by some groups more light on the transgendering issue, and I think that's still something that probably needs some looking at a little bit more. But the main intent of the bathroom bill was to keep really men out of girls' bathrooms and locker rooms.
Yeah, the interesting, this had hearings, and it was interesting to hear some of the testimony for and against it. Transgender individuals did testify against it, and they're scared. And those who testified for it, women with children, they're scared too. Mm-hmm. And you get these competing testimonies. How do you sort through that and decide which way you vote?
Yeah, well, I mean, primarily, I voted for the bill. It was heard in the Judiciary and Rules Committee in the Senate. I'm a member of that. So we did hear, the testimony of both sides of that issue. But I decided the most important thing here is to protect our youth, especially, and especially the girls. I remember in high school, one of the kids climbed up in the men's locker room, went up into the ceiling tiles, and went across the wall with the girls' locker room and to try to spy in there. And of course, he fell through and fell down into there, got in big trouble. But, some of that's kind of natural. We're especially younger men want to go spy on the girls, but we need to protect the youth. And it does happen both ways in some situation. I did look, and a lot of places do have a family bathroom, right? So a person who has transgendered could go into the family bathroom. I know that's not the case in every situation, but hopefully there's enough of those around that would satisfy.
Yeah. Are you worried that this could do more harm than good? For example, someone who has transitioned, they're a woman, but they look like a man, and this bill says you have to go into the women's bathroom, but they look like a man. So what do they do? And there's no family bathroom. This is one of the testimonies I heard, and it broke my heart. What do you do?
Yeah. And I do have concerns about that. I do worry about that, and I have compassion for those folks. I do think we need to, this kind of went through the legislature strongly on party line. It was difficult to say, no, we need to probably tweak that because the momentum was there. It was going to pass no matter what. But I do think there's a good cause to maybe come back and see if we can tweak that a little bit to kind of thread the needle a little bit better to facilitate for those who have truly transgendered.
Well, it's interesting you say tweak a little bit. I know that does happen. Like the library bill that was so contentious, was that last year, the year before? There was a little tweak this year. Is that common to get a bill passed and then tweak it the next year later?
Yeah, that happens all the time. We're always adjusting. There's even though we like to say, our bills, sometimes we call them our babies, or look really good. sometimes there's tweaks that need to be done. It's hard to make a perfect bill in all situations.
Yeah. Let's transition a little bit. Were there any surprises this legislative session for you?
I don't know, the surprises. I mean, I wasn't expecting something like the transgender bill. That was a surprise to me. There was some bills that came through to try to deal with some of the housing crisis stuff. A lot of those bills, there was a handful of them introduced to make higher density, put more houses on smaller lots. There was an update to the Airbnb short-term rental bills laws, and I think a lot of cities probably aren't going to be happy with that, but it kind of went back to the original intent with the short-term rental bill to not put on requirements that are different than a residential home. So I know in some cities like Rexburg and others, they put several conditions on before you can do a short-term rental. Lot size, parking, and other things. And a lot of those restrictions were removed with this bill. I think it was House Bill 583. So there's going to be some changes there. But that did kind of really bring it back to its original intent that was passed, I think it's 2015.
Yeah, I remember that was a very big deal. 2015 Airbnb. It was fairly new for Idaho and had to deal with it, right?
Yeah. Some of the cities, there's like Lava Hot Springs that put on some conditions. You had to have a sprinkler system and some other things in there, which really made it so cost prohibitive that nobody could do it. And it was kind of intended to do that. And so, like a lot of pieces of legislation, you get a few bad apples that ruin it. And so usually what happens is legislation comes through and it kind of swings the pendulum sometimes a little bit more the other way and strikes it down. And so it does, the bad apples causes problems for everybody else. I don't think some of the conditions here in Rexburg have been that bad as far as their short-term rental conditions in other cities surrounding, but we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah. Are there any bills that did not pass that you wished could have passed?
There's one bill that was kind of interesting about, I don't think this official name, but it's been kind of dubbed as left lane lurkers. People who stay in, if there's 2 lanes of traffic, like going from on I-20 here from Rexburg to Idaho Falls in that direction, if you stay in the left lane, some people, either just go the speed limit or they don't even go the speed limit and don't move over to the right. There was a bill that was designed to, make sure you had to move over to the right lane and only stay in the left lane when you're passing. That only got partway through the legislature. There was it needed to be tweaked a little bit. It did pass the Senate. I liked the bill, but I ended up voting against it because it made it so you had to stay in the right lane, but only go in the left lane for passing. And I thought there were some conditions that seemed a little too far for me.
Yeah. I know there's some stretches of highway where you're in the left lane because the right lane is a terrible lane. The road quality is not as good as the left lane.
Yeah, and that was brought up a lot with a lot of legislators that, the right lane, the trucks and everybody goes in that and they break it up, and sometimes it's just not fun to drive in that lane.
Yeah. Was there a particular bill where you were just so excited that it was able to pass? I know you mentioned you had the first bill of the session, but beyond that.
Yeah, so I did have a couple other bills. I will kind of come back to the income tax compliance bill just briefly. So what that did in Idaho, and we followed the Fed's lead on this, but it extends the tax cuts that was passed in the 2017 Jobs Act. And that includes, and then the new things that were included is no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. Some new car interest is deductible if it was assembled here in the United States with American workers. And then there's a new part here, $6,000 for seniors. If you're 65 or older, there's an additional tax deduction per person for $6,000. So that really can reduce some of the income tax that seniors pay. Nationwide, I was reading a news article this morning on this, that there's over 30 million seniors that have taken advantage of that. There's been over 25 million take advantage of the overtime, no tax on overtime, and about 6 million no tax on tips. And so I'm hoping that'll help Idahoans here too. I don't have the numbers for Idahoans, but we are expecting that there'll be higher tax refunds and more money that they're keeping in their pockets. So I'm really excited about, even though it was a little hard for the state and we had to tighten our belts a little bit to do this, I think it was the right thing to do for Idahoans to get the money back in their pockets. We know a lot of folks are struggling to pay for groceries and gas right now and other things, and this will be a help. But one of the bills that I was excited about, I carried, was about cash rounding, penny shortage, Senate Bill 1350. So a lot of people may or may not know, but the federal government stopped producing new pennies back in November of last year. And eventually you're going to run into a situation where there's a penny shortage and a merchant or somebody you're dealing with might not have pennies. So what do? Most of us think, well, it's just a penny. We don't like to carry those in our pockets anyway. They just carry a lot of weight, but it does make a difference. So do you round up? Do you round down? How do you deal with that? And how do you calculate sales tax? And so the bill that I carried talks about that. It's kind of common sense rounding. If your transaction ends in 1 and 2, you round down to 0. If it's 3 or 4, you round up to the nearest nickel, and that carries forth. But then it also specifies that sales tax is calculated on the actual invoice total itself, not on each line item. So if you're rounding up or down, it could affect that a little bit. Now, if a person pays in with a credit card or debit card or some other means electronically, there's no rounding that goes on. This is only for cash sales if you pay in cash for somebody. So that was kind of an interesting bill. Surprisingly, there was a few no votes in the House and the Senate, both. I was actually kind of shocked on that, but it's some of the folks, maybe the hardliners that are worried about the federal government stopping using cash as a currency and forcing everybody to use electronic. And I think it was more of a vote against the feds on that. Of course, my bill didn't have anything to do with the Fed policy, but just interesting.
Yeah, just trying to make sense of this new situation.
Yeah. We did have a bill that, there was a national event where somebody went into a church, reporter and some others, and they did some damage to it. That had some national news there for a while. But there was a bill that came forth that strengthened trespassing of a church and made the conditions a lot more severe. If they do that, there's some more teeth in Idaho law now that we can go after those folks. So it's to protect the Idaho churches. So I don't know. There's a whole bunch of bills we could talk about.
Well, it's easy for any Idahoan to go on to the legislature page, and you can look bill by bill, either by number or by subject. It's just legislature.idaho.gov, and just very accessible to find out what the legislature did this session. And of course, our podcast, we have interviews with Republicans and Democrats through the whole session, talking about different bills and each week. So there's a lot of information out there if you want to dig into this. But I'll ask you this: it is an election year for all the legislators, and you're running for re-election. What does that mean for Doug Ricks in 2026?
Well, I'm running again. This is my 6th year in the Senate. I served 2 years in the House prior to that. I really enjoy what I'm doing. I enjoy the tax policy. Not everybody's into taxes and much. I'm not necessarily an accountant by any means, but I'm a guy that doesn't like to pay taxes. So I've been proud that over the last few years we've been able to lower the income tax rates and some other things. That allows more money to stay in the pockets of Idahoans. I think that's good. I think people can spend their money better than the government can take it and spend it for them, and I think that helps the economy. We've done some significant tax deductions. In fact, over probably since the year 2000, I haven't been in that long, obviously, but Idaho has reduced the income tax rate more than 25% over that period of time, and so that's money that stays in people's pockets. Idaho does have one of the lowest tax burdens if you consider, the property tax, income tax, sales tax, comparing it to other states around the nation. Idaho is one of the lowest in the nation on the actual tax burden, and I'm very happy with that. And as a legislator, I want to keep that trend. If we can keep finding enough revenue, we can trickle down our income tax rate. We're still a little higher than all of our neighboring states on income tax. I'd like to see that come down more, but that has to do it based on the growth and the revenues coming in. We don't want to push that faster than we have the means to do it. We might have come close to that last year, but we have had 4 or 5 years of really plenty, really tremendous growth. I think our state budget's grown by about 50-60% in the last 5 or 6 years. So there is room for a little bit of tightening that has gone on with our budget this year and for next year as well. But for me, I enjoy representing the people of Madison County. That's my district, District 34. I grew up here. I love these people. I think we have really salt-of-the-earth type folks that live here, and I just want to be able to help out and let people live their lives and enjoy the freedoms that we enjoy here.
All right. State Senator Doug Ricks, thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you, Brandon.